On this historic day, let's bring in former White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney. Mick, the big story is the Big Boy press conference taking place just hours after, and it was delayed 2 or 3 times, after that remarkable gaffe in which he confused Vladimir Zelensky with Vladimir Putin. Mick Mulvaney, you've been behind the scenes in the Trump White House. What do you imagine the mood was like among the White House staff as they prepared him for that press conference after that incredible gaffe?
Yeah, I mean, James, I got to think if they're rational, they're depressed because he's not doing well. But my guess is they're not being rational. That a rational staff would have tried to convince him to sort of gracefully bow out of the race already. So my guess is, it's an educated guess, is they're back celebrating, thinking this is great, this is fine, this is so much better. He put everything to rest. He's going to be the next president of the United States. So there's a real cognitive disconnection between what the rest of the world is seeing and what the White House staff is seeing.
But I mean, speaking of cognitive disconnects, right off the bat, the first thing he does is refers to his vice president as Vice President Trump. Have a look.
Look, I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president, but I think she was not qualified to be president. So let's start there.
I mean, this must have been just an absolutely heart-sinking moment for everybody in the Biden camp, and yet he presses on.
Yeah, I was actually watching that in a news studio with a large group of people, and there was just a collective groan from the Republicans, Democrats, centrist alike. It's been hard to watch. This is the president of the United States. There's a collective feeling of sympathy and dread at the same time. So yeah, that's probably the worst gaffe of the night. But face it, James, it's not the last gaffe we're going to hear from Joe Biden.
No, and I mean, that sort of combination of sympathy and dread brings up the whole question of, does the president have some deeper underlying medical condition? And in the last week or so, there's been a lot of crystallization around this idea that quite possibly he's suffering from Parkinson's, which of course would be a huge tragedy for him and the Biden family. But the White House has been caught up covering up the fact that a renowned Parkinson's specialist has visited the presidential residence on multiple occasions. And again, the press seems very compliant in these cover-ups. When Donald Trump spilled a glass of water, they tried to foist the 25th Amendment on him. How do you rate the role of the press in suddenly turning on the Biden administration here, when a lot of them would have suspected this all along?
Yeah, I had dinner this week with some prominent Democrats, including some members of the press, and they were just beside themselves as to how shocked they were to see Biden do as badly as he did. And I kept asking them, how are you possibly shocked? Have you only been reading your own materials? Every conservative in the country has been trying to raise this issue for more than 2 years. You and I have talked about the time that Joe Biden called on a dead person at a press conference. That was from November of 2022. So yeah. You don't know if it's on purpose. You don't know if they just can't help themselves. But really, this whole episode has exposed a fissure in the American culture when it comes to how to deal with the truth, because there's a lot of Democrats who've apparently been willing to sort of sweep the truth under the rug for a long time.
Well, I mean, so then the question is, Mick, where does this go from here? Obviously, the president has done just enough, I would say, in this press conference today, the big boy press conference, as they called it, to stay in the race, but he hardly hit it out of the park. What's going to happen at this Democrat convention, which is coming up? Because I'm hearing more reports of congresspeople urging Biden to step aside, money taps being turned off, and even delegates now being called to have their support checked by the Biden White House or people in the Biden camp. Is there any chance that there might be a shift or a movement at that convention?
James, the best guess I've got on that, again, talking to people as this press conference is going on, is that this wasn't bad enough to get him kicked out of the race. It's also not good enough to put all the concerns about him to bed, which means that the slow bleed that you've seen over the course of the last 12 days since the debate is going to continue. You ask about the Democrat convention. It's a fascinating question, but keep in mind the Republican convention is intervening and will begin on, I think, Monday in this country. And it's going to be fascinating to see how Donald Trump handles it, specifically as to his selection of a vice presidential candidate. He almost has to guess as to whether or not Biden will remain at the top of the ticket or whether or not the top of the ticket will be Kamala Harris or somebody else as he makes his vice presidential pick. Because face it, to be honest, you got to think that his pick for vice president would be different with a Biden-Harris team or a Harris-somebody other team or somebody else team. So it's a very difficult thing to do as a Republican, to try and anticipate who you're running against when there's no definitive answer coming out of this press conference. The slow bleed will continue. I don't think that Joe Biden will be able to proceed as the Democrat nominee, but if he wants to, he will.
Well, this is the thing that I find really interesting, is that there's an awful lot of people who've studied and watched Joe Biden for years and years, decades even, because he's been around basically forever, who say that stubbornness is the thing that defines his presidency, his entire political life. And if he likes being president, he doesn't care what people think. Is this the ego now getting in the way of, well, potentially even the security of the free world?
Yeah, well, a lot of that turns on whether or not that stubbornness is an inherited trait, because we're hearing, and I'm not making this up, that Hunter Biden has assumed a significant leadership role within the White House right now. So the team is advising him, seems to be his family. So is his wife Jill as stubborn as he is? Is Hunter inherited that stubbornness? If that's the case, those are probably the only people that can talk him out of running for president right now. Nancy Pelosi can't do it. Chuck Schumer can't do it. Barack Obama can't do it. Apparently George Clooney can't even do it. He's listening to his family. Be curious to see if that stubbornness goes beyond just him.
But this is like this crazy, almost sort of downfall situation here. It's the president, it's Jill, it's Hunter, all kind of bunkered down in the Oval Office. And then we've got this situation where even if the entire Democrat money machine turns off and everybody says, no, we've got to have Kamala Harris, God help us, or somebody else, well, there's really still nothing they can do to budge him, is it? It's just simply not possible.
That's right. Again, when I was having dinner with the Democrats this week, one of the things they made clear and they wanted everybody to understand is this is up to Joe Biden. He has the delegates necessary to become the Democrat nominee for president, period, end of story. That's not going to change unless he wants it to change. If he wants to be on that ballot in November and he's alive, he is going to be on that ballot. So this is all in his court. Nobody can take it away from. I guess there's one exception. Vice President Kamala Harris could make a motion under the 25th Amendment to have him declared incompetent right now for office, but I would never imagine that happening. Short of that, the ball is in Joe Biden's court.